It's my pleasure to welcome everybody here to DCM Associates, the value of executive coaching for today's not-for-profit leaders. And I asked some of you, and if you're new here, to put in your organization, your position, and the location of your organization so that we all know where people are from, okay? And so anyhow, let me just begin by introducing myself. I am Jim McGuirk. I am a PhD psychologist. I have 35 years of experience in an organization called Astor Services for Children and Families. I was the CEO of Astor for 17 years. I was the past president of the New York State Coalition for Children's Behavioral Health. I was a founding member of two New York State children serving health homes. And I am currently a clinician. I do evaluations, I do some counseling, I do some consulting and some coaching. And on my spare time, I'm a black belt in Lean Six Sigma, which is a organizational development tool that focuses on efficiency and effectiveness. So we are thrilled to be able to be here today. And I hope you understand you have a rare opportunity to hear from a real expert. And Terrence Cahill is someone with significant experience with executive coaching, has more degrees than most people. And Terry, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jim. But with that great compliment, it's probably better for you to introduce me. But let me go from there. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to join you today for this topic. And you know, one of the first questions that should come to your mind is why are Jim and I qualified to represent executive coaching and talk to you about that? And the key issue for me is that I've provided executive coaching for over 25 years. I first came into it when I transitioned from being a leader at Cigna, and Cigna did away with the Medicare product that I was running, and I was faced with the issue of what do I want to do next. And I had always been a successful leader by working with those who reported to me to help develop their skills. And so the better they became, the better I became, and more successful we became. And so when I was faced with that career transition issue, I chose to move in the direction of leadership development and executive coaching. And with that, the Cigna president graciously created a position for me of organizational effectiveness for the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, which then expanded to all the way out to Minnesota. And so I began my work as an internal coach, working with Cigna's senior executives from Connecticut to Minnesota. As I left Cigna, I then became a independent consultant, and with that, I did external coach work, whereby I was contracted by a variety of different organizations to coach their senior leaders. And then lastly, over the years, since I began my private work, I've also had the opportunity to be contracted privately by leaders to help them advance their leadership effectiveness. So altogether, I've had a variety of different executive coaching experiences, a variety of different contexts with different level of individuals. And with that, it's given me some insight that I hope to share with you today that might be helpful to you. You can see my credentials on the slide.
Now, just Terry, are you seeing the slides? Or are you seeing all sorts of crazy things happening?
I'm seeing the crazy stuff. So if you hit the X in the upper right corner of the always use subtitles.
Jim, you got to start with just the start slideshow from the beginning and do it one at a time. The only thing that you'll be seeing is the slides.
Yeah. And that's the problem. Now, everybody see the slides?
Okay, just if you stay there for a second, Jim.
Yeah.
So with this slide, you can see my other credentials. I'm not going to read them to you, but I have a variety of leadership experience, different contexts, which gives me insight into working with individuals from different backgrounds and facing different challenges. And then I have a variety of graduate degrees, 3 of them from social work through administration, and lastly, a doctorate in human and organizational learning. But in respect to my preparation to be an executive coach, I regard the combination of my leadership experiences and my academic studies to be the best preparation for my executive coaching services. So here we are today, and we're happy to share some lessons learned with you.
Well, Terry, I appreciate that introduction, and clearly you have a lot of experience with coaching, and it's important to know I've also been coached, and I do some coaching, nowhere near the amount that you do. So I have certainly some experience, but let's start. Is all coaching the same? What is really executive coaching?
Well, that's a great place to start, because to begin with, the word coach is one that we're all familiar with, and we all assume that we know the same thing in relation to that word. And executive coaching is no different, because it has many different meanings, and I'll get into that. We first became exposed to the word coach probably as we were young and playing in different sports teams or different activities. And at that level, a coach was a generalist. There was only one person that did all things, and so that you had one coach who perhaps taught you how to bat the ball, catch the ball, throw the ball. But now that we're adults, we see a variety of different coaches who are specialized by focusing on narrower issues. In sports, there's likely a defensive coach, an offensive coach, perhaps even a training coach, and others. There's also a variety of personal coaches that we perhaps experience, and some of our participants today might be connected with. Some of them are life coaches, wellness coaches, fitness coaches, et cetera. And then when it comes to this issue of executive coaches, we see the same narrower specialist focus in regards to individuals developing their expertise. And you can see this on a few of those examples on this slide, where the career coach helps leaders identify career possibilities, develop a plan for pursuing particular career objectives, and helps leaders overcome obstacles along the way. A performance coach is focused on helping leaders accomplish the organizational results that are expected of the leader. And that's an example where a performance coach may be called in where someone is recognized as having some issues, some problems, and maybe in a corrective action type of a scenario where the organization wants someone to work with that individual to help advance their results so that they'll be successful. A leadership coach, on the other hand, helps leaders identify personal issues, such as personality issues that might be interfering with their results, biases, mindsets, and other underlying influences that are interfering with their leadership success. Another executive coach is the organizational coach, who's extremely focused on the internal systemic changes in the business system, the things that the leader is interacting with that aren't working, and you need a big thinker who basically brings that broader perspective to the table. Now, some coaches provide more than one type of coaching, Jim. In my case, for example, I provide leadership coaching, working with a leader to surface issues that may be interfering with their success as a leader. But let me pause for a second just to get a clear understanding of what I'm saying there. And the best way to understand that is to think of the iceberg metaphor. Now, above the waterline, the part of the iceberg that we all see, that's comparable to when we're looking at our work and focusing on our skills, our results, and the other tangible issues. But below the surface, we may not recognize other things that are influencing what we see on the surface, our results. For example, a bias that may be limiting our effectiveness, or a particular mindset that we may have that's interfering, or a personality issue that's interfering with how we work with others. Now, as a leadership coach, I look for those below the surface issues and help the leader address them. I also provide a second type of coaching, which is organizational coaching. With all of my leadership experience, I'm able to recognize system issues and help the leader notice them and address them. So as you see, with all of these specialist executive coaches, we need to be cautious when we use the general label executive coach without further defining the focus of our learning need or interest.
Perry, that's interesting. And, just briefly, when I started college, my goal was to be a coach. I wanted to be a basketball coach. And when I went in a different direction, I kind of was a little disappointed. But as I grew professionally, I realized I'm now a coach still. And so, as you say, it's very similar to what sports coaches do. So if you haven't had experience with it, just think about what a sports coach would do. How does coaching differ from supervision or other kinds of ways you would relate and guide staff or senior leaders?
Well, the key thing in supervision or management that's overseeing an employee in a supervisory capacity becomes the results orientation. Who owns the results? Well, you just put up the slide, so let me just comment on this one. The executive coaching definition. I think for today's purposes, if we think about this term as the process of facilitating and accelerating an individual's leader's professional growth, productivity, and fulfillment, I think that'll get us all on the same page. In other words, the executive coach guides and supports a leader through professional challenges and opportunities. It may also help us to distinguish between what executive coaching is not, Jim. And then I'll get back to the question about supervision, because I think that's a critical one. If you can flip to the next slide.
Yeah, and it's good because, Terry, I can't see the guide that we've worked on.
Okay, so I'll just let you know. So in this slide, it basically distinguishes what executive coaching is not. And the first issue is it's not therapy. While both executive coaching and therapy involve significant reflection and introspection, in coaching, we're future oriented. While in therapy, we're often reaching back into the past to try to understand what might have sort of set us on a wrong path when it comes to our our life and what we're doing. Secondly, executive coaching is not mentoring. In mentoring, there's usually a longer term relationship between a senior mentor and a junior mentee. So there's two characteristics there. One is the mentoring relationship is often longer than an executive coaching relationship. And secondly, it's distinguished by the fact that one of the partners is much more senior and experienced, and the other is a junior mentee, and someone who's much less experienced often. In executive coaching, it's more of a issue of peers in one way, where the individuals are partnering to basically explore what issues the leader might do well to address in advance. Now, you do want a coach who is very experienced, because what the experienced coach brings to the table is appreciation of many different contexts and issues that a leader is facing. And so in that respect, the coach is probably best able to respond to the leader's needs when the coach is very well acquainted and familiar with the context in which the leader works. So for example, in my case, much of my career has been in the healthcare realm. Now, another issue is that executive coaching is not consulting. Consultants offer professional advice, whereas coaches help clients find their own answers. It's a growth and development process, learning process for consultants. I'm sorry, for executive coaches and their leaders. And lastly, executive coaching is not teaching. Because teachers impart knowledge. They're the ones who come to the classroom with the more advanced familiarity of the knowledge, and their intent is to provide their students, with that knowledge. Coaches, on the other end, help clients find their own voice. They comprehend what the leader is going through, and they attempt to facilitate and support the leader to find ways to advance their skills and to produce better results.
So Terry, do you think not-for-profits effectively use coaching, and what are some of the benefits for an organization to have their leaders work with a coach?
Well, today we're speaking predominantly, if not totally, to individuals coming from nonprofit organizations. And while there's significant evidence that executive coaching is an effective method to address leadership gaps, and there's even research that reports that the majority of nonprofit leaders would welcome the opportunity for executive coaching, it's reported that fewer than 1 in 3 nonprofit leaders have received executive coaching. On the other hand, executive coaching is much more common in for-profit, larger organizations, such as those that are in the Fortune 100, 500, and even 1,000 categories, Jim. So at this point in the development and evolution of executive coaching, there's tremendous opportunities within nonprofit for developing and expanding its service in that direction.
Do you work with both not-for-profit and for-profit companies?
I have, yes, I have. I would say the majority have been not-for-profit, but Cigna, for example, where I started, was clearly a for-profit company. And I've also done some coaching into the Fortune 100 companies with a colleague of mine. The underlying context for the coach shouldn't be that different, because we're not focusing on the bottom line per se. We're focusing on helping the leader advance and identify, what issues the leader might focus on to produce better results, which subsequently help both the nonprofit and the profit.
So if somebody here and we have a number of CEOs on this call, as well as senior leaders, if someone is thinking about having a relationship, finding a coach, what are some of the things they should think about when they're selecting an executive coach?
Well, that's a great question. Can I hold that one for just a second?
Sure.
Because I think there's another aspect of this not-for-profit, again, because that's our audience today.
What would that be, Terry?
There's a couple reasons why the non-for-profits have really not moved strongly in the direction of the executive coaching. One is clearly the cost. Executive coaching is a one-on-one experience, and that's a higher cost than if you the traditional approach for developing more senior leaders and leaders in general has been to go to a conference or to take a course. And so when you're sitting in a classroom with numerous other leaders being taught by one consultant or teacher or person who has something to say, the cost is much reduced. So that the driving force on executive coaching has been one of, can we afford it? But the results, if we only focus on the expense side, would suggest it's a tough objective for organizations that are smaller, that have tighter budgets and are more dependent on philanthropy versus the private organizations and the profit organizations, as well as the larger organizations. Larger organizations will often have some room in their budget to extend in this way. But if we look at return on investment, the research that's been done around executive coaching concerning the return on investment, when we pay for the executive coaching, how much benefit do we get back? In one study by Manchester Inc., which is one of the large firms that provides executive coaching, the results suggest that the return on investment for executive coaching is 6 times the cost of coaching. And there's other research that suggested it's even higher than that. It's 8 times the cost of coaching. Plus then, and this gets to, I think, one of your questions in regards to some of the other benefits, there's other benefits that aren't dropping particularly to the cost line, but they have to do with the complex nature of leadership challenges in today's society. Things such as the finance and fundraising issues, which would be a particular concern or focus for the nonprofit sector. Employee burnout is rampant, and retention. We're in a period that's referred to as the Great Resignation period. So that it's tough to find employees to fill the slots that we have. So that there's practical problems that the leader is faced with, and executive coaching has been demonstrated that there's research that supports that with executive coaching, the leader in the organization can address those problems more successfully than when the leader's basically trying to work on their own.
Yeah, and you know, Terry, it's interesting because I know, and you've been in the leading position, CEO slot, and I have been. It is very lonely at the top, and it's hard to find people to run ideas with, to talk about things that are more objective. And so it becomes a resource that I don't know if people really take advantage of.
Well, I agree. The opportunity to partner with someone, I think, is partly an external factor where it's, does the organization have the resources? Does the individual have the resources? But it also becomes a issue of internal issues of do I really want to ask someone for help? And some individuals just aren't wired that way. They're not inclined, to go ask someone for help. There's also this issue of mindset. Some individuals, and we probably have all had exposure to one or another, in our work careers, are basically a fixed sort of mindset in the sense of there's only one answer, and often it's that individual. So if you think of the leader who's more the top down, driven, rather than a growth mindset where someone that's interested in learning. So someone that's interested in learning is probably more receptive to asking someone for help and exposing them to some issues that perhaps are uncomfortable as you're learning. And particularly when you get to the leadership level, leaders are hired by organizations because they're expected to find answers and have answers, and they don't get to that seat overnight. They've had many other experiences, and the organization is going to usually pay them at a higher level, so that in some organizations, the culture actually discourages the leader from seeking outside help. I was familiar with one CEO at a New Jersey hospital that the context that he sort of utilized in his organization was, why would you ever go outside our health system, to participate in one of these educational events, or that we have all the answers within. And the fact of the matter is that just shuts down, the possibility for individuals asking for help.
Yeah, and that really limits, right, the possibilities of solutions that people may not think about.
Well, I think that's right, because any one of us has only had certain experiences, and I'll give you an experience. I'm working with a middle manager who was hired, and shortly after his hiring, his boss came to him to ask him, or basically delegate to him, the responsibility for overseeing a new project, which had to do with the future of work. Now, anyone on the line that's heard that term will readily recognize that's a big issue, because the whole notion of what's work going to look like in the future, we're already seeing dramatic changes in workforce, whether they be generational issues, technology issues, et cetera. And so the question of what's our work going to be like in the future is really a very, very powerful issue. Well, this individual, I wondered why the boss might have assigned the newest person on the team to this task. And also it's a middle manager who basically hasn't been around that much. As soon as I heard my client advise me of that assignment, I got excited, because it's a great opportunity. But what I had to do with my client was to help him appreciate the bigness of this topic, and also then to strategize how he could then facilitate the team who had been assigned to work on this project with him to also begin to see this as a very big topic, and so that they could have a common vision of really the issue, what they were really contending with. And only after that could we then strategize of, okay, what's next? So how might you tackle this, and how might you go about addressing this? And that's an example where this fixed mindset versus growth mindset, which is a sort of fundamental issue when it comes to executive coaching, is the openness to consider things differently, newer. There's a lot of accent in the literature today and in organizations more than ever before around innovation. And that's part and parcel of what a lot of this conversation is about.
Yeah, and Terry, one of the things that people don't really understand is the complexity of being an executive director, CEO, of all the different moving parts, and having somebody you can rely on to help you focus on the important things so that you don't miss those issues that may be easy to not think about because you're too busy solving crisis or you're too busy doing this. And so, you know, I can see the value of certainly having somebody who's going to work with you to make sure you keep your priorities in line, to make sure you're not missing important details, and you're not doing some things that may be easy to forget, which is maybe connecting with staff, you know, visiting sites that I think are very important.
One of the things that comes to mind as you were saying that, Jim, was when I introduced myself, I advised everyone that I started as an internal executive coach, and then I moved to an external executive coach. A key distinction there is that when you're an internal coach, you're within the system, the culture that exists there. You're reporting to supervisors and management that presents some issues that may limit the executive coaching, you know, the openness to the executive coaching. And even beyond that, though, when you're in the system, as your comment refers to, there's things that you may not recognize because they're taken for granted. They're routine, they're habit. As you're an external coach, you bring a fresh pair of eyes, and you have that arm's length distance that allows you to say things that someone internal might not say. And I'll give you a practical example of this. My dissertation for the doctorate was I explored how do CEOs make sense of their environment in order that they can then guide and direct their organization to success. And it was a sense-making a type of focus. And I was interviewing a CEO who was very, very well respected and regarded at that time as one of the leading executives, you know, within the state. And I happened to ask him at one point, what would you do in relation to direct reports? It wasn't just employees, it was direct reports. So these are other senior execs who reported to the CEO. If they weren't, in regards to information that they weren't bringing to your attention. And his response was, I'd fire them. I don't tolerate that. I don't allow that. Well, the reality is we all make those types of judgments as to what we're going to say, because you can't pass all the information that you have onto someone you report to, or to anyone for that matter. So you're selectively determining what's important for that person to hear. And then secondly, if it happens that the person you're going to be sharing that with doesn't want to hear certain information, that then, you know, there's a dynamic that begins to happen where you begin to withhold information. And so his response to me was to suggest almost that there's none of that happens here, because I run a tough shop, and that's not true. So that there's a lot of underlying factors. I used that iceberg metaphor before, yeah, because I think it's one that really does reveal that there's much more under the surface that only part of which we're familiar with. I'll give you a practical example of that. By the way,
go ahead.
How many people on the line have driven home, and as they're pulling into their driveway or their residence, they think to themselves, oh my gosh, I don't remember driving home. What that signifies is that there's a lot of other thinking that isn't conscious, that's at a subconscious level, that's habit forming. When we get up and we walk out of the room, we're not thinking of how our legs work and what it takes to walk out of the room. It's subconscious. Our brain's taking over. And so that our brain, you know, is a tremendous asset, because if we had to think about every single thing we were going to do, we'd never do anything. We wouldn't get anything done. But the challenge, and it's one of the purposes in the executive coach, is that when we're in that habit routine form, that's a form, that subconscious level or even unconscious level, when it comes to biases, we may not be aware of things that are adversely affecting, you know, the results, the outcome.
Well, it's interesting because we're both clinicians, so we understand what you're talking about, blind spots, where we all have our own blind spots, but in the area of bias, and we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we have a better understanding of our own implicit bias that we may think we aren't, but it's really through talking with somebody else who can remind us that, we're probably showing some things that are probably not good for our relationships with staff. Does that make sense to you, Terry?
Yeah, because I think we all do that. I think one of the things that we consciously try to do is, bring when there's a flare up, so there's a reaction. Oh, wait, what did I just do? I then become conscious and try to understand, okay, what just triggered that, and what could I do differently? And we do that all the time. That's I think a sort of part of being human. The executive coach, brings another dimension to that into it, though, and particularly if it's the external coach who can essentially listen and observe, and then raise questions and sort of bring challenges. The other thing is the challenges. A good executive coach will make you uncomfortable at times, because he or she will raise issues that you may not be all that comfortable
Right.
talking about. But if the coach isn't doing that, coach probably isn't doing their job, because that may be something that's impeding your results and putting you on a pathway that you aren't gonna like the outcome for.
Terry, you've done a great job in talking about and explaining all the reasons for why leaders, and not just CEOs, but all leaders, should really seriously consider having an executive coach as part of their work in leadership. Could you talk more now about some of the specifics about how do you select it, what it costs, and some of those kinds of issues that people
Sure,
need to
Jim.
think about?
Sure, and that's all the necessary practical considerations. The first consideration I would say is that reflect on yourself. Executive coaching is focused on the leader's needs and interest, not just some general sort of curriculum that the coach is going to put you through. So it's not only beneficial, but it's necessary to have some idea of what your needs are, what your coaching interests are. And some of the things that you might pose as questions to yourself are, what are the challenges you're facing? Are they personality related, that essentially you come off the wrong way, or perhaps you don't come off strong enough? Communication issues are things that I think we take for granted because it's such a fundamental issue, but often communication issues are a challenge, and something that we'll work on in executive coaching. Motivation issues, executive presence issues, particularly as we're moving up the hierarchy, the expectations can change, or they do change, and so paying attention to those. Or are the issues that are challenging you skill issues, such as trouble establishing a vision or a strategy for the organization? Problem solving skills, which leaders always face with. Conflict management is another executive coaching sort of area, or relationship issues. Or a third area might be, you could have board relationship issues if you're at that level of the organization. And if that be the case, that's probably the most risky issue for the leader. In other words, it's probably one of the issues where you run, don't walk for support. And having someone at a coaching level who can help you understand and assess what's really going on there, and then develop some tactics to address that, it can be critical. Or last example in regards to what are my needs, is there something politically going on, or something within the community, that larger picture, that really I could benefit from having a thought partner, someone to talk this out through. Now, we all have blind spots, so these self-evaluations that I'm suggesting are not going to reveal all the variety of things that might be beneficial in a coaching situation. So that's where a good executive coach can really add to the picture, as he or she gets to know you, and become aware of any additional issues that the person can bring to you. But now, once you got that knowledge, then a second issue is also an internal organizational issue, and it has to do with securing support within the organization for the idea of you receiving executive coaching. The only obvious exception to this is if you're going to be paying for the service, and you get to do what you want. And I have had a number of clients over the years that their organization didn't even know that the leader was had an executive coach. But if there's a possibility that your organization will pay for the coaching, or if you plan to pursue grants, and there are organizations that provide grants for leadership development issues. I worked, I was the lead faculty member for the New Jersey Healthcare Executive Leadership Academy for 4 or 5 years. And they had secured a grant from one of the medical organizations in order to provide for a tremendous amount of money, in order to support that program. But to secure that support internally, you probably want to go back to something that I already mentioned, which is the most powerful tactic for securing organizational support is the return on investment evidence. That it makes sense for organizations to help their leaders become more effective. They don't show up at your door with every single answer that they're going to need, to take them further. So that's all the internal work, Jim.
But Terry, you know what, as you were talking, DCM Associates does a lot of work in searching new CEOs and new leaders. And one of our recommendations to boards is it's probably important for them to think about having a coach for their new leader, regardless of how experienced it is. Because again, there are things that the person's going to need to know about and learn. And you want to make sure they have all the possible supports to be successful.
Yeah, there's the onboarding issue for an existing leader who's going to be retiring, for example. There's succession planning that organizations haven't been all that advanced with, so a coach can help someone work through that. The board itself then might benefit from having someone who can work with them in relation to what are they really looking for in this new leader, if they're replacing an executive director. So you're absolutely right. There's a variety of different, these are all learning issues, learning tasks that the outside executive coach can support and help individuals and boards work through.
Yeah, and the slide I have now kind of summarized the kind of discussion that you just went through, to kind of remind people to ask that self-evaluation question.
Yeah, and again, just to remind everyone that they'll get a copy of the slides, and the slides will be in an order that'll, I think, will be self-evident for you. Once you have all of that internal sort of sense of, okay, so what do I need? What am I looking for? Here's a slide that speaks to the benefits of executive coaching. I've spoken to a little bit of that before, but you can see that there's these and there's many others that have been identified in the literature. If you're going to get that internal support, these things, although some of them are what might be referred to as, quote, soft issues, they don't drop to the bottom line that quickly. I think we're much more attentive in our organizations to issues such as the culture of accountability, staff retention in the face of resignations, et cetera, that really organizationally, we really do need to address. And so as we address them better, we'll be more successful. But the issue, and maybe go to the next slide, Jim. Okay, so here's the issue. Once you have all that internal assessment, accomplished, here are some things that you want to consider. Some of it has to do with gathering information from the individual, and these are the sort of topics that will lead to the questions that you would consider. Looking for someone that has experience in your area, so that if you're not for profit, working in child welfare issues, then someone who's had that experience will bring some insights from their leadership and or coaching experiences to the table. The issue of degree credentials, as I said in the beginning, it's an unregulated discipline. There is no control over the title of executive coaching. So people come to the position or represent themselves as executive coaches who come from a broad variety of backgrounds, some of them with not a lot of experience, others with tremendous amounts of experience, some with academic credentials that are very impressive. And you can see some here, others who may not have much academic credential at all. And I don't mean to say that one academic credential is better or more successful as a coach than another. But on the other hand, there's certain things we can assume that a person, has learned and brings to the table when they have the credentials. There's also different coaching associations there's a lot of coaching associations, as a matter of fact, that are providing different training programs. And as individuals come out of those programs, they're being identified as a certified coach by such and such organization. Now, some of the larger coaching associations, which are represented on this page, are ones that have been around for a while and have developed their name. I personally am not associated with them directly, so I can't speak to them, but I did want our listeners to be aware of that's one source of credential as well. But then there's a couple other, well, actually the references, and I don't want to skip over references because references are probably the most critical issue when it comes to finding someone, to be a coach. In my case, it was, I began my experience with a coach as a result of the CEO that I was working for had a coach and suggested that he was, very, helpful, et cetera. And so I took his reference and began with that. The research suggests that personal references are the number one way to get connected with an executive coach. But in these days, there's also a lot more going on in social media, LinkedIn, for example. And we're becoming much more comfortable, I think, with those sources of representation of information out there. But at the end of the day, this is one of those buyer beware markets because it is uncontrolled and there's no, exact background, exact, pathway for individuals to get into the executive coach title. And so that as you're looking for an executive coach, you want to, sort of be attentive to what that person is bringing to the table through these credentialing, through the references. And then the last couple of issues that I've added was coaching style. Some coaches will approach the coaching task from a strengths building. So I'm going to try to identify with you, all your strengths, and then we'll build on that. Others might approach it from a gaps issue of things that are missing. And so that in the assessment phase, that'll be part of the process there. The other thing is the coach's availability. As a result of the pandemic, most coaching today is taking place virtually. So the DCM, for example, has a national presence because virtually we were able to connect with individuals that are looking for support and services, whether they be individuals, or boards.
Terry, we've got probably about 10 minutes left, and I want, and I'll encourage people, if you have questions, to start putting them in the chat as we go through some of the more specifics of coaching. So, Terry, we'll go quickly through the slides and stop me or tell me to move forward on anything that you think is particularly important that people should know about before we end this.
Yeah, this slide is just the process. Once I connect with a coach, what happens next, and it's a simple representation of an assessment phase, and because this is a client-centric or sort of type of focus, what you'd want to be cautious of is that the coach isn't just basically bringing his or her curriculum to the table, but is rather trying to get to know you and get to know what your issues are. Then, the other parts of the process are as you would normally approach most problems. There's a plan, how are we going to approach this? Then there's the sessions. And one of the questions on the sessions is how frequent are coaching sessions? I would recommend that if there's work to be done, it's usually done on a frequent basis. And so that a weekly type of a session is going to accomplish more in the shorter term than something that's less frequent, because when you're away from the coaching session, the learning session, you're inundated with so much work that you get distracted. And so things that sounded really good in the coaching session, I didn't get to this week because I just had other work to get done. And so that the weekly session, helps that. But there are examples where you might extend the period in between. I for example, there's more attention today to emerging leaders than I've seen in the past. These are individuals who are coming up through middle management. They're not at the executive table yet, the C-suite, but they're ones that the organization sees has a lot of potential. And so the organizations are beginning to provide that group, those individuals, with more opportunities to develop and grow their skills. And one of the techniques or tactics is executive coaching. And so that on my private practice, I've developed an emerging leaders product, which I started in this direction with the frequency issue. And in order to make it accessible to this sort of middle rung of leadership, often there's varying fees that aren't at the same level as the C-suite, and so that I have a discounted rate there. There's also the frequency issue of how often do I meet with that group, because then it makes it practical for them, but also practical for me. And so that those individuals I'm seeing on more close to a monthly basis. You put up the coach fees issue.
I did, because we did have a question, actually. We wanted to make sure it was addressed.
Yeah. You can see there's a whole variety of variables that will influence what an individual coach is going to be looking for in their rate. The range goes somewhere from $100 to $500. The not-for-profit, which comes into the client's industry variable at the top here, it will usually be at a lower to mid-level range. And there's a couple things. One is that's what their budget might be able to sustain, but also the not-for-profit industry attracts a group of individuals who are committed to working with the nonprofit industry. DCM Associates is committed to working with the nonprofit industry, and so that the fee structure is one that's got to be a better fit for that industry and that group. And so that's where you'll see the fee range for executive coaches in the nonprofit. It will be in the $100 to $200 range. It's probably a safe assumption.
But Terry, let's remind people again what you said at the beginning. You should always be thinking about your return on investment. It may sound like a lot of money, but in the end, you'll probably be saving money for the organization in terms of better decision making and better, not having the kind of mistakes that might happen if people were to figure it out on their own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think what you're describing is that you shouldn't feel as if it's a commitment forever.
Right.
This is okay. I've got some issues that I'd like to work with someone on. I'd like to sort of think through those, talk through those, get some ideas from the person. And so maybe my commitment that emerging leaders product that I have is a commitment of three sessions, and so that we have the opportunity to get to know each other a bit, and then to begin to exchange in a second session, and then a third session, so that there's a familiarity and a comfortability, and actually a results oriented. So that the issue on executive coaching, unlike the therapy model, which might be a much more, what would typically be a much longer term type of orientation, the executive coach should be very focused on helping you get the result in a short time frame on these individual issues and problems that you come up. You just put up the slide though that is I think the last one in the deck, and it has to do with well, our focus and discussion thus far has been on the individual orientation to coaching, and coaching is a benefit from top to bottom within an organization. Many organizations have begun to move in the direction of trying to develop a more learning and coaching culture within their organization. And so that managers are expected to support and coach and facilitate the development of their direct reports, and the executives who've had the benefit of individual executive coaching from a hired external, they should be actively involved up and down the organization and role modeling what that coaching, should represent. You may recall, Jim, GE under Jack Welch was extremely oriented towards the learning model. And a key part of that was that their executives were the teachers. They were the ones in the classroom. They were role modeling how this is done. And it wasn't a dictatorial sort of, my way or the road. It was a facilitative and supportive learning type of culture. And so I thought this topic, would not be complete without, closing with this notion that coaching culture is really a benefit, to all within the organization. And again, back to our great resignation period, where people are looking for purpose. They're looking for a home in an organization that listens to them and wants to work with them. Particularly our younger generation is more entrepreneurial. They want their ideas listened to. This coaching culture and learning culture is a really important factor, I think, that's associated with our topic today.
Terry, you reminded me that what I would do when I was a CEO with my leadership team is we'd go away on retreats, 2 or 3 days. We'd get somebody to facilitate, but then we would have that person come back to really follow through with whatever recommendations or whatever commitments, because we know, the work is hard. There are a lot of issues that come at us from all different directions. Sometimes we can predict it, sometimes we can't. And the idea that you have somebody out there that's going to keep you focused, I think is probably important, not just for you as the leader of the organization, but for your entire leadership team and for other leaders in the organization. Does that make sense to you, Terry?
Yeah, it does. And it's just another story from one of my coaching experiences where I was working with the CEO, and he was an exceptional CEO. I'd actually known him for quite a long time. And he had some exceptional people on his executive team. But what they had not really done is they hadn't become a team. They really weren't. He was doing much one-off. So, at the executive table, it was the CEO and the one executive, the CEO and a different executive, the CEO and a different. They weren't crossing, between them into the more dynamic team, type of interaction. And in talking with the CEO was a very private person, and he really had sort of refrained from being open and sort of helping individuals connect. And so as we talked about ways in which he might do that, he began to experiment with some ways of taking the team out into non-work environments, and it began to open. They began to see him in a different way, and then he began to see them in a different way. And so that it really did translate into evolving the team much more than it had been in the organization itself.
Terry, we've got a couple of minutes. Is there one or two key points that you think you want to reiterate or summarize for the attendees?
Well, I think it's, if I had to bring it down to one thing, it has to do with openness to learning. And sometimes we're faced with a push, which basically is, oh my gosh, I'm failing something. And if I don't correct it, I've got to, I'm going to have some consequences here. And on the other hand, is the example of the growth and the sort of openness to learning. But in either case, there's an opportunity to move beyond where we are. And the executive coach is a good executive coach is one who can help you do that, who can basically support, challenge, facilitate, raise questions. There's Piaget was a learning theorist that some may be familiar with on the call. And one of his sayings was that you never really know something well until you can ask a good question about it. And so that much of what the executive coach does is ask questions, is not give answers, because the answers are really ones that the leader will be challenged to get. And I'll just give you one other example in that, is that if you think of where we're at on any given topic at a point in time as a staircase, and each level of the staircase represents a certain level of understanding of that issue. So that the younger child is at the lower levels, the more advanced person is at the higher levels of the staircase. But the challenge becomes when we're on a particular staircase, how do we get to the next stair above it? Because you can't see over the lip as to what's involved there. In one of the key ways that we advance beyond that sort of blind spot is by reflecting on a good question to explore what the possible answers might be. So the coach is one who asks good questions. So as our participants today might begin to talk with individuals, who could be their potential coach, and ask about their style, one of the things you want to listen to is I've been known for my ability to ask good questions. However they say that would be a critical factor from my perspective. Not for I've been known for, I'm an expert with such and such. Well, we all encounter people who are experts, but they don't help me become an expert. So those would just be a couple of things, Jim, that I think I'd leave people with.
Well, and what you've really focused on is really the culture of your organization. And how do you build a culture that's learning? How do you build that growth mindset in your culture? You mentioned Jack Welch, and I talked about being a black belt in Lean Six Sigma. That's always about continuous quality improvement. And so that means you're always looking to do better. And it's not just providing programs, but it's being better leaders and being better supervisors and doing work with all the variety of relationships you have to work with in your role, whatever that might be.
Well, and I think we all know that. And then the practical problem becomes one of, oh my God, how am I going to fit that into my schedule? I'm already, working 10, 12 hours a day or just overwhelmed with it. But the concern becomes if I don't fit that in the schedule, if I don't get some new energy, some new ideas, some new ways of thinking, then, I mentioned burnout earlier. Burnout is going to be inevitable because the answers from yesterday are going to wear out and they're not going to help me in my organization get to where we need to get to going forward.
Well, Terry, this has been very informative. And certainly I hope people understand they had the opportunity to listen to somebody who not only has that direct experience in leading an organization, but also providing coaching to leaders in organizations and also working with students and helping students learn. So we've been fortunate to be able to listen to you. And I hope everybody has learned something. And just to remind you that for all the registrants, we will be sending out the recorded part of this session along with the slides so that if there are things you miss or if you had questions, certainly they may be answered by looking at it. So I want to thank you, Terry, and I appreciate the opportunity and I hope people understand. So with that, Terry, I'll give you the last word.
Well, and it comes, further to what you just said, is DCM is in the support business for the not-for-profit industry. We do the executive search. We do, educational events such as this call. We have the Leadership Academy or Institute that we've developed and we're completing this fall. Its first sort of series. So don't hesitate to give us a call with a question. I accented questions earlier. We'd be happy to talk with you and see how we can be of service to you in any one of these or other services. So again, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Okay, so I'm gonna hang out for a couple more minutes. The presentation, if people have any questions, and we'll be there, and hopefully you found this useful. So, okay, we've got no questions. So I think I'm going to stop the webinar, and once I do leave, I don't know if we both need to do it, Terry.
Yeah, I think we'll be done. Thanks again,
Okay.
everyone. Have a great day.